Welcome one, welcome all to the greatest Halloween countdown for the young and the tall. Today we're going to be starting our countdown with a great story, rebooted from once before. The story is called The Secret. Wish you would keep yours real close to your heart. If you have the one, that is. Something was off. As he stood in the doorway of his kitchen, Jameson frowned, his entire body still as he tried to figure out what was different. It didn't seem like anything had been moved. Mary's toys were scattered across the floor of the living room, and, as usual, Cory's shoes were not on the mat as they were supposed to be. So why couldn't he shake the feeling of worry?
We're home!
Jameson nearly jumped out of his skin as Cory and Mary bounded into the door, covered in dirt from the park. He frowned at his partner and their daughter, crossing his arms. "Cory, I told you, my mother is coming over for dinner tonight. Can you please not make a mess?" Mary glanced between the two of them before hurrying up the stairs, her footsteps pounding on the hard wood and echoing in the tense silence as Cory's smile twisted into a frown.
Lighten up, will you? We were having fun at the park. Kids get dirty. I'm sure your mother's not going to care.
"Well, I care," Jameson said, turning his back on Cory, who huffed in aggravation. The two men went into the kitchen. Jameson went to remove the lasagna from the oven. Cory waited for a second before speaking.
That's not fair,
He said, glowering.
Dinner's not for 2 hours. She can take a bath before then.
"It's not the point!" Jameson shouted, but he immediately regretted it upon seeing Cory's shocked look. I'm sorry, it's just... You know how important this is to me. My mother's never been a fan of, well, us, so I just don't want to give her more reason not to. For a moment it looked as if Cory was going to argue, but eventually he simply slumped his shoulders and sighed.
I guess you're right. I'll go give Mary her bath, then come down and clean up the mess.
Jameson smiled and kissed Cory on his cheek, and he watched his partner go upstairs. Dinner, as Jameson predicted, had been a disaster. Mary barely ate her food. His mother complained that the living situation had scarred the child, and Cory looked about ready to throw her out the entire time. The night had ended with his mother storming out of the house, Mary locking herself in her room, and Cory storming out in a fit of rage, headed to the liquor store. Jameson simply sat on the couch, his eyes filling with tears as he thought of the implications his mother had made. What if she was right? What if Mary was losing her appetite and everything just because of their home situation? Not because he and Cory were gay, but but because he and Cory seemed to be fighting so much. Sighing, Jameson stood up and trudged up the stairs to his daughter's room. She was sitting on the floor playing with her dolls. He smiled and watched for a moment until he noticed a fair-sized bruise peeking out from under the hem of her pajama shirt. "Sweetie, what happened?" he said, sitting next to her with a concerned look. Her stare was blank, as if she had no idea what he was talking about. Lifting her shirt, he could see that the bruise formed a long line, as if she'd run into a rail while walking backwards. "How did that happen, Mary?" After a few seconds, Mary spoke ever so quietly.
"The boogeyman did it."
Jameson could feel his heart speeding up, panic gripping him. The boogeyman? Who's the boogeyman? Why did he do this? Mary shrugged.
"I didn't want to play anymore, so he had to punish me."
Punish you? Jameson choked. Who is the boogeyman? Is he someone you know? Tell me who he is, Mary. She shook her head.
"I'll get in trouble. He told me it's our little secret."
Try as he might, threaten to take away as many toys or months of television as he could, Mary would not tell Jameson who the boogeyman was. To make matters worse, when Cory got home, he was too drunk to remember whether or not he see the mark on Mary or not. Jameson had terrible dreams that night of a monster sneaking into his daughter's room and torturing her in the night. For the next month, Jameson noticed an improvement in Mary. She began to eat more, smile more, and even began painting beautiful pictures. Cory reported that there were no more marks on her after checking every night while giving her a tub, and Jameson had come to believe that the boogeyman was just a nightmare, and she had, in fact, gotten the bruise accidentally. After he was sure Mary was alright, he took a business trip he'd been putting off for weeks, only returned 5 days later. A day early. But, it would be a surprise. It was 3 o'clock, the usual park time, so he was unsurprised at the silence in the house as he entered. Or the mess. Mary's clothes were strewn everywhere, the sink was a mess of unwashed dishes, and something smelled like it was rotting. Sighing, Jameson set to work immediately, picking up the clothes, before he even thought about relaxing. He trudged up the stairs, noticing that the smell was persistent, stronger even. He wondered if smells could rise, like hot air did in the summer. Shrugging to himself, he entered Mary's room and proceeded to tidy up a bit. Just as he was about to leave, Jameson noticed that one of the floorboards had come loose and was creaking. Curious, he leaned down to examine it and saw that the nails were coming out ever so slightly. Since he didn't want Mary to get hurt, he pried up the board with surprising ease, intending to have Cory cut a new one. In the meantime, he'd put something over the spot, plywood or the like. It was only after he'd moved the board out of the way that he noticed the photographs. Jameson's heart stopped as he reached a trembling hand toward them and scooped them up with wide, terrified eyes. There, in the photos, was his daughter, his 8-year-old daughter. He looked away, horrified and disgusted. Who would do such a thing? Glancing quickly through the images, his anger rising with each shot until he stumbled across one taken in the bathroom with the mirror behind it. He squinted hard, making out a reflection behind the Polaroid's flash. Blonde hair, blue eyes, tanned features. Jameson gasped, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. It was Cory's image in the mirror. Rage boiled from every crevice of Jameson's soul, spilling out as he crumpled the image, his face going red as anything. There was a creak in the master bedroom. His head whipped around. Cory didn't know he was home. He'd been quiet enough. If he could catch him in the act, if he could expose him for the monster he was, perhaps he could protect Mary. Perhaps he could save her from this torture. Grabbing his camera phone and setting it to record, Jameson stalked towards the master bedroom. He was determined to end this once and for all. He flung open the door, ready to throw curses and rush Mary from the house, but once again he was dumbfounded. Blood painted the walls in splattered pattern, spraying out in a calm, macabre way. The lamp in the corner had been smashed and was flickering against the floor, casting eerie shadows that added to the horror of the scene. There, in the middle of the bed, seeping warm red liquid into the blue sheets they'd argued so much over, was Cory. Jameson covered his mouth in disgust as he finally realized where the smell had been coming from. His eyes searched his partner's ruined body, and it looked like as if his throat had been slashed and as if he'd been castrated post-mortem. He barely had time to comprehend what happened, and when all of a sudden a blinding pain shot up his spine, causing him to fall face first onto the throw rug. He couldn't feel his legs, and he hoped desperately that wherever Mary was, she was safe, away from this madness. Out of the corner of his eye, Jameson saw a pair of blood-spattered white stockings appear out of nowhere. Mary! Run! The little girl ignored her father as she bent down to face him. A twisted smile adorned her face, which was absolutely covered in dark red, caked on fluid. Her eyes were black as coal as she tilted her head, bringing the knife into view.
You left me with the boogeyman, Daddy.
Mary whispered as Jameson's terrified face drained of color.
But don't worry. I won't tell anyone. It's our little secret.